The wooden floorboards creaked under Raj's feet as he made his way through his childhood home. It had been 3 weeks since his father passed away, leaving behind a house full of memories and boxes that needed to be sorted. Raj had been putting off this task, but with his sister coming next weekend to help decide what to keep and what to give away, he knew he had to start somewhere. His father's bedroom was exactly as he had left it. The bed was neatly made, a habit from his military days that never faded. The curtains were half drawn, letting in strips of afternoon sunlight that illuminated dancing dust particles in the air. Family photos lined the dresser: Raja's graduation, his sister's wedding, and their mother who had passed away 5 years earlier. Raj sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand over the quilt his grandmother had made decades ago. The reality of his father's absence hit him all at once. They hadn't always been close. His father was a man of few words, strict but fair, who worked long hours at the factory to provide for them after their mother got sick. There were so many questions Raj wished he had asked him while he still had the chance. With a deep breath, Raj stood up and opened the closet. He figured he would start with his father's clothes. The familiar smell of Old Spice aftershave and laundry detergent wafted out. Neatly pressed shirts hung in a row, organized by color. Below them, perfectly aligned shoes sat in pairs. His father's simple, orderly life was reflected in everything he owned. As Raj began removing shirts from their hangers, he noticed a shoebox on the top shelf. He reached for it, thinking it might contain important documents or keepsakes. Inside were old birthday cards, his parents' marriage certificate, and a small notebook filled with his father's handwriting, mostly household expenses and reminders. Raj placed the box on the bed and continued emptying the closet. He worked methodically, just as his father would have, sorting items into piles: donate, keep, and unsure. When he finished with the closet, he moved to the dresser, emptying each drawer of socks, underwear, and t-shirts. The last piece of furniture was the bed. Raj decided to look underneath for any stray items before tackling the bedside tables. He lay flat on his stomach and peered into the darkness beneath the bed frame. Something caught his eye: a manila envelope pushed far against the wall. Reaching for it, his fingers barely grazed the edge. He stretched further until he finally managed to hook a finger around it and drag it towards him. The envelope was yellowed with age and sealed with string wrapped around a small button closure. It wasn't labeled, but it felt weighty in his hands. Raj sat back on the bed, turning the envelope over curiously. Why would his father hide this under his bed? His father wasn't the type to keep secrets, at least not that Raj knew of. But then again, there was a lot about his father's life before marriage that Raj didn't know. His father rarely spoke about his past. With careful fingers, Raj unwound the string and opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of letters, photographs, and what looked like official documents. The first photo showed a much younger version of his father standing next to a woman Raj didn't recognize. They were laughing, his father's arm around her shoulders. Raj had never seen his father look so carefree. He flipped the photo over. Written in faded ink was, "Me and Anita, summer 1975. Anita? Raj had never heard his father mention anyone by that name. The woman was beautiful, with long dark hair and bright eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She wasn't Raj's mother, he was certain of that. Raj set the photo aside and picked up one of the letters. The paper was thin and delicate, the blue ink slightly faded. The letter was addressed to his father and dated March 1976. My dearest Vikram. I hope this letter finds you well. It's been 2 months since you left, and I still find myself looking for you everywhere. The doctor confirmed what we suspected. I'm pregnant. 4 months along now. I wish you could be here to feel our baby kick. I understand why you had to go back home, but I can't help wondering if things could have been different for us. Please write back when you can. I miss you terribly. All my love. Anita. Raj's hands trembled as he read the words. Pregnant? His father had another child? His mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? What happened to her and the baby? Did his mother know about them? He quickly shuffled through the remaining photos. Several showed the same woman, her belly growing progressively larger in each one. The final photo in the stack showed her in a hospital bed, cradling a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Written on the back, Anita and baby Nikhil, November 12, 1976. Nikhil. A half-brother Raj never knew existed. More letters revealed pieces of the story. His father had met Anita during a year-long work assignment in Mumbai, before he was married to Raj's mother. They had fallen deeply in love, but his father had family obligations that called him back to his hometown. He had promised to return for Anita, but something had prevented him. The letters didn't say what. The last letter was dated May 1977. Vikram. I've waited for your reply for months. I understand now that you've chosen a different path. I won't write again after this. Nikhil is growing so fast. He has your eyes and your stubborn chin. Someday, he might want to know about you. I've enclosed our new address, just in case. Take care of yourself. Anita. Attached was a small piece of paper with an address in Mumbai, a connection to a part of his father's life that had been completely hidden from him. Raj sat back, overwhelmed by what he had discovered. His father, the straightforward, honest man he thought he knew completely, had a whole other life before, a love, a child, a secret he had kept buried under his bed for decades. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Raj carefully returned everything to the envelope. He had gone through his father's belongings looking for physical items to either keep or discard, but instead had found something far more complicated, a mystery about the man who had raised him, and a brother somewhere out there who might not even know their father existed. Raj reached for his phone. He needed to call his sister. Their father's story was far from complete, and the journey to discover the truth was just beginning. The phone conversation with his sister Priya had gone exactly as Raj expected. Initial disbelief, followed by shock, then a flood of questions he couldn't answer. She had immediately booked an earlier flight and would arrive tomorrow instead of next weekend. Some discoveries were too big to process alone. After hanging up, Raj spent hours sifting through the remaining contents of the envelope. Among the letters and photos, he found a small diary with entries dating back to 1975. His father's handwriting filled the pages, documenting his time in Mumbai and his relationship with Anita. March 15, 1975, met the most remarkable woman today at the corner tea stall. Her name is Anita. She spilled chai on my new shirt and insisted on paying for dry cleaning. I insisted on taking her to dinner instead. She laughed and agreed. Her laugh could light up the darkest room. Raj flipped through the pages, watching his father fall in love through hurried notes and poetic observations. For a man who rarely showed emotion, these writings revealed a passionate side Raj had never witnessed. The diary entries stopped abruptly in December 1975, around the time his father must have returned home. Sleep evaded Raj that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the father he knew with the man from these writings. Why had his father never mentioned Anita or Nikhil? What made him leave Mumbai and never return? And most importantly, where were Anita and Nikhil now? Morning brought no clarity, only a stronger determination to find answers. After a quick shower and coffee, Raj returned to his father's bedroom. He searched more thoroughly, checking under the mattress, behind the dresser, and inside the bedside table drawers. In the drawer of the bedside table, beneath a stack of reading glasses and medicine bottles, Raj found a small wooden box. Inside was a key and a bankbook for a safety deposit box at the local bank. The last entry was from just 3 months ago, shortly before his father's health had taken a turn for the worse. By noon, Raj was sitting in a small room at the bank, the safety deposit box on the table before him. His hands trembled slightly as he inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of official-looking papers, a small velvet jewelry box, and a sealed letter with Raj's name written on the front in his father's familiar handwriting. Raj opened the letter first. Dear Raj. If you're reading this, I'm no longer here, and you found the envelope under my bed. I always knew that one day, you would clean out my room and discover my secret. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you while I was alive. Yes, before I met your mother, there was Anita and our son, Nikhil. I loved her deeply, but when my father fell ill, I had to return home. I promised to come back for her after he recovered, but then he died, leaving our family business in shambles and your aunt to care for. I was the only one who could step in. Months turned to years. I wrote to Anita many times, explaining my situation, begging for understanding. But one day, my letters started returning unopened. I later learned she had married someone else, a good man who adopted Nikhil as his own. I decided then to let them live their lives without disruption. Years later, when I met your mother, I fell in love again and started a new chapter. But I never forgot Anita or our son. What you need to know is this: I have kept track of them over the years through an old friend in Mumbai. Nikhil is alive and well. He's a doctor now, living in Mumbai with his wife and 2 children. Anita passed away from cancer 5 years ago. Inside this box are legal documents recognizing Nikhil as my son and entitling him to a share of my estate. There's also contact information for my friend in Mumbai who can help you find him. The jewelry box contains my mother's ring. I never gave it to Anita or your mother. Perhaps you will find someone worthy of it someday. I hope you can forgive me for keeping this secret. And if you decide to reach out to Nikhil, please tell him I've thought of him every day of my life. With all my love. Your father. Tears streamed down Raja's face as he finished reading. He had so many conflicting emotions: anger at his father for the deception, sadness for the pain he must have carried, and a strange sense of relief knowing there was more family out there in the world. The other documents confirmed everything in the letter. There were legal acknowledgments of paternity, a copy of Nikhil's birth certificate with his father listed as the parent, and updated information about Nikhil's life, including a recent address and phone number in Mumbai. The small velvet box contained a beautiful gold ring with a modest diamond surrounded by tiny rubies. His grandmother's ring, preserved all these years for someone worthy. As Raj packed everything back into the safety deposit box, his phone buzzed with a text from Priya. Her flight had landed early, and she was on her way to their father's house. On the drive home, Raj's mind raced with possibilities. Should they contact Nikhil? Would he want to know about them? What would they even say? Hello, we're your half-siblings, and our father kept you a secret our whole lives. When he pulled into the driveway, Priya was already waiting on the porch steps. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She stood as Raj approached and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. I still can't believe it, she whispered against his shoulder. I found more, Raj said, holding up the safety deposit box. Dad left us a letter. And Nikhil's contact information. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows, as Priya read their father's letter. When she finished, she looked up at Raj, her expression determined. We have to find him, she said simply. He's our brother. Raj nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. What if he doesn't want to know us? What if he hates Dad for abandoning them? We won't know unless we try, Priya said, reaching for her phone. I'm booking tickets to Mumbai. We owe it to Dad to at least try. As Priya made travel arrangements, Raj walked back to his father's bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. He pulled out the old photograph of his father and Anita, studying their smiling faces. I wish you'd told us, he said to his father's image. We could have handled it. We could have known him all these years. But as Raj returned the photo to the envelope, he realized that his journey to understand his father was just beginning. And somewhere in Mumbai, a man named Nikhil was living his life, completely unaware that everything he knew about his past was about to change. Mumbai was nothing like Raj had imagined. The humidity hit them like a wall as they stepped out of the air-conditioned airport. Horns blared, people rushed in every direction, and the scent of street food mingled with exhaust fumes. This chaotic city had once been home to their father, and somewhere in its sprawling expanse, their half-brother was living his life, unaware of their existence. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Priya said, adjusting her backpack as they waited for a taxi. They had packed light, a week's worth of clothes and all the documents from their father's safety deposit box. The taxi ride from the airport to their hotel was an adventure in itself. Their driver weaved through traffic with casual disregard for lanes, carrying on a cheerful conversation despite Raj and Priya clutching their seats in terror. "First time in Mumbai?" the driver asked, swerving around a motorbike. "Yes," Raj answered, his knuckles white. "Our father lived here once, a long time ago." "Ah, coming to see the old neighborhood?" "Many people do this." "Where did he live?" Raj pulled out the address from Anita's last letter. "Bandra, I think." The driver nodded approvingly. "Very nice area. Expensive now." "Back then, maybe not so much." Their hotel was modest but clean, located in a central area that would make it easy to navigate the city. After checking in and freshening up, Raj and Priya sat on one of the twin beds, staring at the contact information for their father's old friend, Kabir. "Should we call him first, or just show up?" Priya asked, twisting her hair nervously. "Call," Raj said firmly. "This isn't the kind of thing you spring on someone." Kabir answered on the third ring. His voice was deep and gravelly, speaking English with a musical lilt. When Raj explained who he was, there was a long pause on the line. "Vikram's son," Kabir finally said, not a question but a statement of fact. "He told me you might contact me someday." They arranged to meet that evening at Kabir's home. The address was in an older part of the city, not far from where their father and Anita had once lived. Raj and Priya spent the afternoon wandering around the neighborhood, trying to imagine their father walking these same streets nearly 50 years ago. Had he sat at that corner chai stall? Had he and Anita walked hand in hand through that small park? Do you think he ever regretted not coming back for them? Priya asked as they watched children playing cricket in an open space between buildings. Raj thought about the diary entries, full of longing and love. "I think he regretted it every day of his life." Kabir's home was on the third floor of an aging apartment building. The stairwell was narrow and dimly lit, but when they reached his door, they were greeted warmly by an elderly man with bright eyes and a wide smile. Come in," he ushered them inside. "I've been waiting for this day for many years." The apartment was small but filled with books, photos, and mementos from a well-lived life. Kabir's wife, Deepa, served them chai and homemade sweets while Kabir studied their faces. "You look like him," he said finally, nodding at Raj. "Around the eyes. And you," he turned to Priya, "have his smile." For the next 2 hours, they listened as Kabir painted a picture of their father's life in Mumbai. How he and Anita had met at the university where Kabir taught alongside Anita. How their father had become like a brother to Kabir during his year in the city. And how devastated he had been when family obligations called him home. He wrote to her faithfully, Kabir said, sipping his tea. Every week for nearly 2 years. But Anita's parents were traditional. They pressured her to marry a local businessman who was willing to accept her child as his own. Eventually, she agreed, thinking your father had moved on. But he hadn't, Raj said quietly. Kabir shook his head. No. By the time he was free to return, she was married. He respected her new life and stayed away. But he asked me to keep an eye on them, to let him know if they ever needed anything. And Nikhil? Priya leaned forward. What is he like? A warm smile spread across Kabir's face. He is a good man. Brilliant doctor. Specializes in pediatric medicine. He grew up believing his stepfather was his biological father. After both Anita and her husband passed, I debated telling him the truth, but it wasn't my place. Does he know anything about our father? Raj asked. Only what Anita told him, that his biological father was a kind man who couldn't stay. She never spoke ill of Vikram, even after all that happened. Deepa returned with a photo album and placed it on the coffee table. Anita gave this to me for safekeeping before she died. She said someday, Nikhil might want to know more about his birth father. The album contained photos of Anita with Nikhil as he grew from a baby to a young man. School graduations, birthdays, ordinary moments of a life their father had missed. In the back of the album was an envelope containing letters their father had written to Anita but that had been returned unopened. She kept them all, Deepa said softly. Even though she never read them. As the evening grew late, Kabir wrote down Nikhil's clinic address on a piece of paper. He works there Monday through Friday. His home address is private, but you can find him there. Back at their hotel, Raj and Priya lay awake in their separate beds, processing everything they had learned. What are we going to say to him? Priya whispered in the darkness. Raj stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. I don't know. Hello, our father was your biological father, and he kept track of you your whole life but never contacted you? It sounds terrible when you say it out loud. Maybe we shouldn't disturb his life, Priya suggested. He seems happy. He has a family. What if knowing the truth only hurts him? Raj turned to look at his sister's silhouette. Don't you want to know him? He's our brother. Of course I do, she sighed. But we have to think about what's best for him, not just what we want. Sleep came fitfully to both of them that night. Raj dreamed of his father standing on a bridge between two lands, unable to cross back to where a woman and small boy waited for him. In the morning, they decided to visit Nikhil's clinic. They wouldn't reveal everything right away. First, they would see what kind of man their brother was, and then decide if knowing the truth would bring him pain or peace. The pediatric clinic was in a modern building in a busy medical complex. Children and parents filled the waiting room, some looking anxious, others chatting easily. A colorful mural of animals covered one wall, and toys were scattered across a play area. At the reception desk, Raj cleared his throat. We'd like to see Dr. Nikhil Sharma, please. The receptionist looked up from her computer. Do you have an appointment? No, Priya said. It's a personal matter. The woman frowned slightly. Dr. Sharma is very busy today. If it's about a child, I can schedule you for next week. It's not about a patient, Raj explained. We're family. From out of town. The receptionist looked skeptical but picked up her phone. After a brief conversation in rapid Hindi, she hung up and nodded. He has a short break between patients in 20 minutes. You can wait, but he won't have much time. They sat in the waiting area, hearts pounding. Through a half-open door, they caught glimpses of a tall man in a white coat moving between examination rooms, his manner gentle and assured with the children he treated. Their brother. So close now, and yet still a stranger. The next 20 minutes felt like the longest of Raj's life. At exactly 20 minutes past their arrival, the receptionist waved them over. Dr. Sharma can see you now, but only for 10 minutes. He has patients waiting. She led them down a narrow hallway to a small office at the end. Please be brief, she reminded them before knocking and opening the door. The office was modest, with medical textbooks lining the shelves and children's drawings pinned to a bulletin board. Behind a desk cluttered with files and a laptop sat a man in his late 40s, his dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. When he looked up, Raj felt his breath catch. Nikhil had their father's eyes, the same deep brown, slightly hooded, with that same questioning gaze. "Hello," Nikhil said, standing to greet them with a warm but puzzled smile. "Sunita said your family? I'm sorry, but I don't believe we've met." His voice was different from their father's, softer, with a more pronounced Mumbai accent, but something in his mannerisms, the way he tilted his head slightly when asking a question, was hauntingly familiar. "My name is Raj, and this is my sister Priya," Raj began, his rehearsed speech suddenly evaporating from his mind. We're from Delhi originally." Nikhil gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please, sit. Are you looking for a pediatrician for someone in your family? Or are you medical professionals? I'm afraid I'm confused about the family connection." Priya glanced at Raj, then took a deep breath. "Actually, we believe we are family. More specifically, we think we're your half-siblings." The smile froze on Nikhil's face. "I'm sorry." "Our father," Raj said, his voice steadier than he felt, "was Vikram Kapoor. We recently found evidence that he might have been." "My biological father," Nikhil finished, his expression unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "That's impossible. My father was Sanjay Sharma. He passed away 5 years ago." Priya opened her bag and pulled out the envelope. "We found these after our father died 3 weeks ago. Letters between him and your mother, Anita. Photos of them together, and of you as a baby." Nikhil stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "This must be some kind of mistake." "We've also spoken with Kabir uncle," Raj added gently. "He confirmed everything." At the mention of Kabir's name, something shifted in Nikhil's expression. "Kabir uncle sent you here?" "He gave us your clinic address," Priya said. We all thought you should know the truth." Nikhil stood abruptly, turning to look out the small window behind his desk. His shoulders were tense, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, another gesture so like their father that Raj felt a pang of recognition. "I have patients waiting," Nikhil said finally, his back still turned. "Children who need my attention." "Of course," Raj said, feeling a crushing disappointment. They had come so far, only to be shut out. "We understand. We can leave these documents with you to look at when you have time." Nikhil turned back to face them, his expression now carefully controlled. "My mother never spoke of anyone named Vikram Kapoor. The man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bicycle, who paid for my education, who sat proudly at my medical school graduation, that was my father. Not some stranger from Delhi." Priya stood, her eyes filling with tears. "We didn't come here to disrupt your life or to take anything away from the man who raised you. We just thought you deserved to know the truth. And selfishly, perhaps, we wanted to know our brother." Something in her words seemed to reach Nikhil. He sighed heavily and checked his watch. "I have patients until 7 tonight. After that, I usually stop at Café Mongar for dinner. If you want to continue this conversation, you can find me there around 8. It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. Raj and Priya thanked him and left the envelope on his desk. They spent the afternoon wandering through the city, too anxious to enjoy the sights. At 7:30, they found Café Mongar, a bustling restaurant with colorful murals covering the walls and ceiling fans spinning lazily overhead. They secured a table and ordered cold drinks, watching the door nervously. At 8:15, Raj was beginning to think Nikhil wouldn't show up. But then the door opened, and there he was, still in his work clothes but without the white coat, looking tired and somewhat wary as he scanned the room. Priya waved, and Nikhil made his way to their table. He sat down without removing his bag, as if he might need to make a quick exit. "I looked at the contents of that envelope," he said without preamble. I also called Kabir uncle. He confirmed your story. A waiter approached, and Nikhil ordered a beer and some food without looking at the menu. When the waiter left, he continued, if what you're saying is true, it means my mother lied to me my entire life. Not necessarily, Raj said carefully. From what we understand, she met your stepfather, the man you knew as your father, when you were still very young. Maybe she felt it would be less confusing for you to believe he was your biological father. Nikhil's fingers drummed on the table. I found a photo of myself as a newborn in that envelope. My mother and a man who is clearly not Sanjay Sharma. Our father, Priya said softly. Nikhil shook his head. You keep saying that. Our father. But he was never my father. He was, at best, a man who got my mother pregnant and then disappeared. It wasn't like that, Raj protested. Our father had to return to Delhi because his father was ill. He intended to come back for your mother and you, but by then she had married someone else. A convenient story, Nikhil said bitterly. The waiter returned with Nikhil's beer and took Raj and Priya's dinner orders. When he left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, Priya spoke. We have our father's diary from when he lived in Mumbai. His side of the story. Would you like to read it? Nikhil took a long drink of his beer. What I'd like is to understand why you're here. What do you want from me? Money? A kidney? Family reunions every Diwali? Nothing, Raj said firmly. We don't want anything from you. We just thought you deserved to know the truth. And yes, selfishly, we were curious about you. You're our brother, after all. Half-brother, Nikhil corrected. Born from a relationship I knew nothing about until today. The food arrived, and they ate in awkward silence for several minutes. Nikhil seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at Raj as if trying to find something familiar in his features. Tell me about him, Nikhil finally said, pushing his plate away. What kind of man was he? Raj and Priya exchanged glances. It was a complicated question. He was quiet, Raj began. Reserved, even. He worked hard, too hard, probably. After our mother got sick, he took on extra shifts at the factory to pay for her treatment. He loved music, Priya added. Old Hindi film songs especially. Every Sunday morning, he'd play records while making breakfast. Was he kind? Nikhil asked. Raj nodded. Yes, though not always demonstrative about it. He showed his love through actions more than words. He taught us to ride bikes, helped with homework, sat through Priya's terrible piano recitals without complaint. He kept track of you, Priya said gently. All these years. Through Kabir uncle. He knew you became a doctor. He was proud, I think, even if he couldn't tell you himself. Nikhil's expression softened slightly. Why didn't he ever contact me directly? After my mother died, or after Sanjay died? I think he believed he'd lost the right, Raj said. He didn't want to disrupt the life you'd built or dishonor the memory of the man who raised you. Nikhil nodded slowly, considering this. I need time to process all of this. It's a lot to take in. Of course, Priya said. We're here for another 5 days. If you want to talk more, or if you have questions. I have a million questions, Nikhil admitted with a small, sad smile. But I'm not sure I'm ready for the answers yet. As they prepared to leave, Nikhil hesitated, then asked, did he suffer? At the end? The question caught Raj by surprise. No, he said after a moment. It was peaceful. Heart failure. He went to sleep and didn't wake up. Nikhil nodded, something like relief crossing his face. Good. That's good. He stood and extended his hand formally. I'll call you. Maybe. I just need some time. As they watched him walk away, disappearing into the Mumbai night, Raj wondered if they'd done the right thing by coming here, by disrupting Nikhil's understanding of his own life and identity. "Do you think he'll call?" Priya asked quietly. Raj wasn't sure. But one thing was certain, they had opened a door that could never be closed again. For better or worse, their family story had taken yet another unexpected turn. 2 days passed with no word from Nikhil. Raj and Priya tried to distract themselves by exploring Mumbai, visiting markets, historical sites, and beaches, but their thoughts constantly returned to their half-brother and whether he would contact them again. "Maybe we should just go home," Priya suggested as they sat in their hotel room on the third evening. "We've done what we came to do." We told him the truth. The rest is up to him. Raj was about to agree when his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Nikhil. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I'd like to show you something. Can meet at your hotel at 2 p.m. Relief washed over Raj as he showed the message to Priya. "He wants to see us again. What do you think he wants to show us?" Priya wondered, her eyes bright with renewed hope. "I don't know, but at least he's reaching out. That's a good sign." They spent a restless night imagining what tomorrow might bring. By 1:30 the next afternoon, they were waiting anxiously in the hotel lobby, watching every person who walked through the entrance. At precisely 2 p.m., Nikhil arrived, dressed casually in jeans and a light blue button-down shirt. He seemed more relaxed than during their previous encounters, though a certain wariness remained in his eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," he said after brief greetings. "I've taken the afternoon off. There's a place I'd like to take you, somewhere important to me." They followed him outside to where his car was parked. As they drove through the busy streets, Nikhil explained, "After you left the other night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at those photos, reading those letters. I called my uncle, my mother's brother, and asked if he knew anything. He was surprised I'd found out, but he confirmed everything. Apparently, several family members knew but had kept the secret at my mother's request." "That must have been difficult to hear," Raj said quietly. Nikhil nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. "It felt like my whole life had been built on a lie. But then I remembered something my mother once told me. She said, the truth of who we are isn't only in our blood, but in the choices we make and the love we give." I think she was trying to tell me something important, even if she couldn't say it directly. They drove for nearly an hour, leaving the densely packed city center for more residential areas. Finally, Nikhil pulled up in front of a modest apartment building with a small playground nearby. "This is where I grew up," he explained as they got out of the car. "From ages 5 to 18. Before that, we lived in a smaller flat a few streets over." He led them through the building's entrance and up 2 flights of stairs. The hallway was narrow but clean, with potted plants outside several doors. Nikhil stopped in front of apartment 3B and pulled out a key. "My uncle still owns this place. He rents it out usually, but it's between tenants right now. I asked if I could bring you here." Inside, the apartment was empty of furniture but filled with afternoon sunlight streaming through large windows. The walls were freshly painted white, erasing any trace of the family that had once lived there, but Nikhil moved through the space with the familiarity of someone coming home. "This was our living room," he said, gesturing to the largest space. "My father, Sanjay, installed bookshelves along that wall. He believed education was the most important gift he could give me. Every birthday and Diwali, he gave me books along with my other presents." He moved to a smaller room off the main area. "This was my bedroom. I had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. My mother put them up when I was afraid of the dark." As they followed him from room to room, Nikhil shared snippets of his childhood, birthday parties in the small dining area, homework at the kitchen table, his mother teaching him to cook in the tiny kitchen. His voice grew softer, warmer, as he spoke of the people who had raised him. In what had once been the master bedroom, Nikhil paused, looking out the window at the playground below. After you left the cafe, I was angry. Not at you, you were just the messengers, but at everyone who had kept this secret. My mother, Sanjay, even Kabir uncle. But then I started thinking about my childhood, about the man who raised me. He turned to face them. Sanjay knew I wasn't his biological child, but he never treated me any differently. He chose to be my father when your father, when Vikram, couldn't be. He never missed a school event, never failed to be there when I needed him. That kind of love, it's a choice, isn't it? Raj nodded, thinking of their own father. Yes, I think it is. Yesterday, I went back to Kabir uncle's place, Nikhil continued. I wanted to understand more about what happened. He showed me more photos, told me stories about when Vikram lived here. About how much he loved my mother, how devastated he was when he had to leave. Nikhil walked to the center of the empty room, where dust motes danced in the sunlight. Kabir said Vikram came back once, about a year after I was born. He stood across the street from our building for hours, watching. My mother was already married to Sanjay by then. Vikram saw us, me, my mother, and Sanjay, returning from a walk. Sanjay was carrying me on his shoulders. Priya's eyes filled with tears. Did our father ever approach them? Nikhil shook his head. No. Kabir said he watched for a while, then turned and walked away. He told Kabir later that seeing me happy with a complete family, he couldn't bring himself to disrupt that. The three siblings stood in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. I found something else in my mother's belongings, Nikhil said finally, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn photograph and handed it to Raj. It was hidden in the back of her jewelry box. I found it after she died but never understood its significance until now. The photo showed a much younger version of their father, smiling broadly as he held a tiny infant, clearly newborn Nikhil. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, Vikram and Son, November 1976. The only day. He did hold me, Nikhil said softly. At least once. Raj studied the photo, his throat tight with emotion. Their father looked so young, so happy, so full of hope, unaware that this would be his only moment with his firstborn son. I'd like you to have it, Nikhil said. I have the memory of a real father who raised me. You should have this memory of him with me. Priya shook her head. No, you should keep it. It's proof that he loved you from the beginning. I have copies, Nikhil admitted with a small smile. I made several as soon as I realized what it was. As they left the apartment, Nikhil locked the door behind them, symbolically closing the chapter on his childhood home. But as they walked down the stairs together, something had changed between them. The awkwardness was fading, replaced by the tentative beginning of a connection. Outside, Nikhil pointed to the playground. I spent countless hours there as a kid. Sanjay taught me to play cricket on that patch of grass. He wasn't very athletic, but he tried his best for me. Our father was terrible at sports too, Raj laughed. He took us to play badminton once and hit himself in the face with the racket. Nikhil smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time. Really? That's not in the idealized image I was building of him. Oh, he was far from perfect, Priya assured him. He couldn't cook to save his life. Everything was either undercooked or burnt to a crisp. And he was stubborn, Raj added. Once he made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. That sounds familiar, Nikhil admitted. My wife says the same about me. As they walked back to the car, Nikhil hesitated, then asked, would you like to meet them? My family? My wife has been curious ever since I told her about you. Raj and Priya exchanged surprised glances. We'd love to, Priya said warmly. Good, Nikhil nodded. She's preparing dinner for all of us tonight. Fair warning, my kids will have a million questions. They're 8 and 10, and the idea of suddenly having a new aunt and uncle is very exciting to them. As they drove away from the apartment building, Raj looked back at the place where Nikhil had grown up, where their father had once stood across the street, watching from a distance. So many lives connected by choice and chance, by secrets and revelations, by love that persisted despite time and distance. The envelope under their father's bed had revealed not just a hidden past, but opened the door to a new future, one where the family their father had always longed for might finally come together, even if he wasn't there to see it. Nikhil lived in a spacious apartment in a newer part of the city, with large windows offering views of the Arabian Sea in the distance. As they approached his door, Raj felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. This was more than just meeting Nikhil's family, it was stepping into a life that could have been connected to theirs all along. The door opened before they could knock, and a woman in her early 40s with warm eyes and a welcoming smile greeted them. "You must be Raj and Priya," she said, extending her hands to them. "I'm Aisha. Nikhil has told me so much about you. Please, come in." The apartment was filled with the rich aroma of home cooking and the sound of children's laughter from another room. Family photos lined the walls, Nikhil and Aisha's wedding, their children at various ages, family vacations, and professional achievements. Raj couldn't help noticing that Nikhil's life seemed full and happy. "The children are so excited to meet you," Aisha said as she led them to the living room. "They've been asking questions all day. I hope you don't mind their curiosity." "Not at all," Priya smiled. "We're curious about them too." Nikhil appeared from what looked like a home office, now more relaxed in the comfort of his home. "Sorry, had to finish a quick patient note. Rohan. Divya. Come meet your aunt and uncle." Two children rushed into the room, skidding to a stop when they saw the visitors. The boy, taller and clearly the older of the two, studied them with serious eyes, while the girl bounced excitedly on her toes. "Are you really our dad's brother and sister?" the girl, Divya, asked without preamble. "He said you didn't know about each other until just now. How does that happen?" Nikhil cleared his throat. "Remember what we talked about, Beta? Sometimes grown-up stories are complicated. But not secret," Divya insisted. "You said no more secrets in our family." Raj exchanged glances with Priya, impressed by Nikhil's apparent honesty with his children. Many parents would have simplified the story or hidden it entirely. "That's right," Nikhil agreed, resting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "No more secrets. But we can save the complicated explanations for when you're older." The boy, Rohan, stepped forward and extended his hand formally, just as his father had done at their first meeting. "I'm Rohan. I'm 10. Do you live in a big house in Delhi?" Raj shook the boy's hand, suppressing a smile at his businesslike manner. "I live in an apartment, actually. But your Aunt Priya has a house with a small garden." "With flowers?" Divya asked, immediately turning her attention to Priya. "Yes, and a lemon tree," Priya told her. "Maybe someday you can visit and see it." "Can we, Papa?" Divya looked up at her father with pleading eyes. Nikhil's expression softened. "We'll see. First, let's get through dinner without you interrogating our guests, okay?" Dinner was served at a large table in the dining area. Aisha had prepared an impressive spread of homemade dishes, butter chicken, palak paneer, dal, and fresh naan. The meal began somewhat awkwardly, with Rohan and Divya stealing curious glances at their new relatives, but soon the conversation flowed more naturally. "Nikhil tells me you work in software, Raj?" Aisha asked, passing him a bowl of rice. "Yes, I design apps for a tech company," Raj explained. "Currently working on educational games for children." "Cool." Rohan perked up. "Like math games?" "I'm really good at math. Just like your dad was at your age," Aisha said fondly, looking at Nikhil. And still is, Nikhil added with a smile. I use math every day in my practice. Were you good at math too? Rohan asked Raj. Raj laughed. Not especially. That must come from your dad's side. A brief silence fell over the table as everyone processed the implications of that statement. For the first time, they were acknowledging the genetic connections between them, the traits that might have passed from their shared father to the next generation. What about you, Priya? Ayesha asked, smoothly changing the subject. Nikhil mentioned you're a teacher. Yes, I teach literature at a university, Priya replied. I've always loved books and stories. I like stories too. Divya exclaimed. Especially ones with dragons. Me too, Priya said with a grin. Dragons are the best. As dinner continued, Raj observed the easy affection between Nikhil and his family. He was a different person here, more relaxed, quick to laugh, and endlessly patient with his children's questions. It was a side of him they hadn't seen before. After the meal, while Ayesha served dessert and the children cleared the table under their father's supervision, Raj found himself looking at more family photos displayed on a side table. One caught his eye, Nikhil as a young boy, standing proudly next to an older man who must have been Sanjay, both holding cricket bats. That was taken when I was 9, Nikhil said, appearing beside him. My first proper cricket match. I hit a 6 and felt like a hero. He looks like he was very proud of you, Raj observed. Nikhil nodded, his expression softening. He was. Always. Even when I decided to become a doctor instead of joining the family business. He paused, then added quietly, I've been thinking a lot about fathers these past few days. I can imagine, Raj said. Finding out about our father must have raised a lot of questions. It did, Nikhil admitted. But also some answers. I always wondered why my mother would sometimes look at me with this strange expression, sad but also, something else. Now I understand she was seeing him in me. Raj nodded. Our father used to get this faraway look sometimes. Especially on certain days of the year. I wonder now if he was thinking about you, about what he was missing. The children returned, Divya carrying a photo album that she proudly presented to Priya. Mama said I could show you my baby pictures, she announced. Papa says I looked like a little monkey when I was born. As Priya and Divya went through the album, Rohan approached Raj with a more solemn question. If you're my dad's brother, does that mean you're really my uncle? Like, by blood? Yes, Raj said gently. I am. Rohan considered this. So I have 2 grandfathers? The one I knew, and the one who was also your father. That's right, Raj confirmed, impressed by the boy's understanding. Did he know about me? The question caught Raj off guard. I'm not sure, he answered honestly. I think he knew about your father, about Nikhil, but he might not have known about you and your sister. Rohan nodded, processing this information with remarkable maturity. That's sad. He missed out on a lot. Yes, Raj agreed, his throat tight with emotion. He did. Later, as the evening was winding down and the children had been sent to get ready for bed, Ayesha brought out a pot of tea and joined the adults in the living room. I want you both to know, she said to Raj and Priya, that you're welcome in our home anytime. Family is family, no matter how we discover each other. Nikhil reached over and took his wife's hand, gratitude clear in his expression. Ayesha's been incredibly supportive through all of this. Even when I was angry and confused, she reminded me that more family is always a blessing, not a burden. Priya smiled warmly at Ayesha. Thank you for welcoming us so graciously. We came to Mumbai with no expectations, just hoping to maybe meet Nikhil once. This, she gestured around the room, is more than we could have hoped for. What happens now? Nikhil asked, looking between Raj and Priya. You're leaving in 2 days, right? Raj nodded. We have to get back to work. But this doesn't have to be the end. No, Nikhil agreed. Just the beginning. He took a sip of his tea, then added, I'd like to see where he lived, our father. And visit his grave. Not right away, but someday. He would have liked that, Priya said softly. As the tea was finished and the evening came to a close, Rohan and Divya insisted on saying goodnight to their new aunt and uncle. There were hugs and promises to video chat soon. At the door, Nikhil embraced each of them, no longer the hesitant stranger from their first meeting but a brother beginning to embrace that connection. Thank you, he said simply. For finding that envelope. For making the journey. For not giving up when I was difficult. Thank you for giving us a chance, Raj replied. Our father would be happy to see us together like this. As they took a taxi back to their hotel, Raj and Priya sat in contemplative silence. The city lights blurred past the window, and Raj thought about how one discovery had changed so many lives. The envelope under his father's bed hadn't just revealed a past secret, it had opened the door to a future neither of them could have imagined. Do you think Dad knew this would happen someday? Priya asked quietly. That we'd find each other? Raj remembered the carefully preserved letters, the hidden photo, the safety deposit box with Nikhil's information. I think he hoped, he said. I think he left us breadcrumbs, trusting we'd find our way. As Mumbai's night sky stretched above them, Raj felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before his father's death. Their family story wasn't ending, it was expanding, growing in ways no one could have predicted. And somewhere, he liked to think, their father was watching, his deepest wish finally coming true. 6 months later, Raj's apartment in Delhi buzzed with activity. The living room had been rearranged to accommodate extra seating, and the dining table extended with borrowed chairs. Priya was in the kitchen arranging sweets on a platter while Raj adjusted a welcome banner hanging above the entryway. Do you think we've overdone it? Raj asked, stepping back to examine their handiwork. The apartment was spotless, decorated with fresh flowers and family photos, including several new ones featuring Nikhil and his family. Not at all, Priya said, wiping her hands on a towel. It's their first visit to Delhi. We want them to feel welcome. In the months since their trip to Mumbai, their relationship with Nikhil had deepened through regular video calls, shared photos, and lengthy email exchanges. What had begun as tentative connections had blossomed into genuine bonds. Nikhil had been full of questions about their father, eagerly absorbing every story in detail they could share, building a picture of the man he had never known. The doorbell rang, and Raj felt a flutter of excitement as he went to answer it. There on his threshold stood Nikhil, Ayesha, Rohan, and Divya, travel-weary but smiling. Divya immediately launched herself at Raj with a hug that nearly knocked him over. Uncle Raj. We came on an airplane and I got to sit by the window and I saw clouds that looked like elephants. Raj laughed, hugging her back. I bet that was amazing. Come in, all of you. Welcome to Delhi. As they settled in, the children exploring the apartment with curious eyes, Ayesha presented Raj with a box of homemade snacks. We couldn't come empty-handed, she said warmly. Thank you, Raj said, genuinely touched by the gesture. We have a full schedule planned for your visit, sightseeing, shopping, the best restaurants, but if it's too much after your journey, we can always adjust. Actually, Nikhil said, exchanging glances with his wife, there's one place I'd like to visit first, if you don't mind. Raj understood immediately. Of course. Whenever you're ready. Later that afternoon, they stood together at the cemetery, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of a nearby neem tree. Their father's grave was simple but well-maintained, with fresh marigolds that Priya had placed the day before. Nikhil stood motionless before the headstone, reading the inscription, Vikram Kapoor, 1950 to 2024, beloved father and friend. Rohan and Divya stayed respectfully quiet beside their mother, sensing the importance of the moment. After a long silence, Nikhil reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. He knelt and carefully placed it at the base of the headstone, a smooth stone from Mumbai's Juhu beach. "I thought he should have something from there," Nikhil explained softly as he stood. "From the place where it all began." Raj nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Priya slipped her hand into his, her eyes also shining with tears. "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness," Nikhil continued, his gaze still on the headstone. "Not just forgiving him for not being part of my life, but forgiving my mother for keeping the truth from me, forgiving Sanjay for the same reason." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "And I realized something, they all made the choices they thought were right at the time, with the circumstances they were facing." "That's very generous of you," Priya said softly. Nikhil shook his head. "Not generous. Necessary. For me, for my children." He looked at Rohan and Divya, who were now placing small flowers they had picked beside the stone. "I want them to know their full heritage, all the branches of their family tree. No more secrets." The next day, they visited their father's house, which remained untouched since Raj and Priya had begun sorting through his belongings months ago. The process had been put on hold after their discovery and subsequent trip to Mumbai. "It feels strange being here," Nikhil said as they walked through the rooms. "Knowing he lived here all those years." He paused in the living room, studying the family photos on the wall. "Did he ever mention my mother? Even in passing?" Raj shook his head. "Never by name. But there were moments, like on certain days when he seemed distant. Now I wonder if those were significant dates for them." Nikhil nodded thoughtfully. "Kabir uncle told me their anniversary was April 15th. Did he ever act differently around then?" Priya's eyes widened. "He always took that day off work. Said it was for personal reflection. We never questioned it." They continued to the bedroom where it had all begun. The bed had been stripped, the closet emptied, boxes of belongings stacked neatly against one wall. Nikhil knelt and peered under the bed, reaching his arm into the empty space. "This is where you found it? The envelope?" "Yes," Raj confirmed. "Pushed all the way against the wall. If I hadn't been thorough, I might have missed it." Nikhil stood, brushing dust from his hands. "It's strange to think how easily this all could have remained buried. If you hadn't found that envelope, we never would have known about each other." "I've thought about that too," Raj admitted. "Was it just chance? Or did he mean for us to find it?" "I think," Priya said slowly, "that he couldn't bring himself to tell us while he was alive, but he also couldn't bear the thought of his secret dying with him. Leaving the envelope where it might be found was his compromise." In the days that followed, they showed Nikhil and his family around Delhi, visiting historical sites, sampling local cuisine, and creating new memories together. The children were fascinated by everything, the bustling markets, ancient monuments, even the different birds in the parks. Their enthusiasm was infectious, bringing a fresh perspective to places Raj and Priya had taken for granted. On their last evening together, they gathered at Priya's house for a farewell dinner. Her small garden was strung with lights, and the lemon tree Divya had been so curious about was adorned with paper lanterns. They ate outdoors, sharing stories and laughter under the stars. After dinner, as the children played an improvised game of cricket with a plastic ball and a wooden spoon, the adults sat with cups of chai, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. "I never imagined when I started clearing out Dad's room that it would lead to all this," Raj said, gesturing at their expanded family. "Life does that sometimes," Aisha observed. "Takes you down unexpected paths." "Speaking of unexpected," Nikhil said, setting down his cup, "Aisha and I have been discussing something." He looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been thinking about moving to Delhi." Raj and Priya stared at him in surprise. "Really?" Priya asked. What about your practice in Mumbai? There are good hospitals here that need pediatricians, Nikhil explained. And after meeting you both, after seeing where our father lived, I feel connected to this place. Plus, the children adore their aunt and uncle. He smiled as Rohan demonstrated a cricket swing to Divya. It wouldn't be right away. Maybe next year. But we want the children to know this part of their heritage too. Later, after Nikhil and his family had returned to their hotel to prepare for their flight the next day, Raj and Priya remained in the garden, reluctant to end the evening. Do you think we should sell Dad's house now? Priya asked. We've put it off long enough. Raj considered the question. Actually, I was thinking, if Nikhil's family is serious about moving to Delhi, maybe they could use it. It would need some updating, but it's a good house in a nice area. Priya's face lit up. That's perfect. It would stay in the family. Dad would have liked that. As they sat under the night sky, Raj thought about the journey of the past 6 months. From the discovery of a hidden envelope to the expansion of their family, from grief and confusion to understanding and connection. Their father's secret had initially felt like a betrayal, but had ultimately led to something beautiful and unexpected. I think, Raj said quietly, that Dad would be at peace now, knowing we found each other. That his children finally know one another. And that his grandchildren will grow up together, Priya added. In the distance, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky, much like the stars above. Somewhere in those lights was their father's house, where one day soon children's laughter might ring through the rooms again. Where new memories would be layered over old ones. Where the story that began with pain and separation might continue with connection and love. Life, Raj reflected, was rarely a straight line. It twisted and turned, revealed and concealed, separated and reunited. And sometimes, the greatest revelations came from the most unexpected places, like an envelope hidden under a father's bed, waiting to be found at just the right time.